Hi,
Hey,
going. Okay, let me see. Oh my God. Okay. Just getting this to work. Are you currently at home right now?
I'm at home. I'm in the bathtub. I just got out of the
Oh,
shower,
nice.
so I thought I would just stay here.
Very nice. You're ready in your white cube.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Today, I'll be interviewing Patrick, who's currently in our artist tool show. That's up at the gallery right now. Um, So I thought we would start with the porcelain coaster paintings that are that's currently on view. So these tile-sized coasters that resemble canvases. So they seem to bridge form, functionality, and process in a very multifaceted way. So I think I would start by asking you how it was conceived.
Um, well, for the people who don't know me, I'm Patrick Carlin Mohundro, and I make work that mostly um, relates to or comes out of the bathroom. For me, like the bathroom is just a really safe space. Maybe that's why I'm here right now. And because the bathroom is sort of lined with these tiles, I inevitably um, came across these tile coaster pieces, which look like this. They're just squares, uh, but they uh, mimic a canvas. And I'm not sure what the rest of your question exactly was.
Um, well, because it seems that like through the process of developing it, it kind of it's like a standalone design piece, right? That you could use as a functional coaster. But it also serves as a canvas that preserves like residuals, like from like coffee stains or like tea stains or like other traces that depend on like, how you use it. So it's also like a painting, a standalone like work in its own sense. So like these are like to me they serve very different functions. So yeah, like um, so maybe uh, like right, but you also developed like kind of like certain rules for like how they would be presented or like how like there's like exchange like that you were able to do with people uh you know like that has the coasters that have the coasters.
Okay, I guess there's three parts. There's like the branding and what that has to do with my work, because they can be looked at as a commercial product, and then there's how that extends to painting, and then the third part would be how that becomes a collaborative or participatory piece.
Right.
In regards to branding and how we deal with products, commercialism, capitalism, I really believe that although brands and corporations have a profound understanding of what affects us, we still continue to have authentic emotions and experiences within these branded identities.
Right.
So just because a company sells us something that's red and is supposed to make us feel something red, whether that's a feeling of excitement or anger, that we will sort of have our own individual subjective experiences with whatever that product is that may not be the thing intended for the brands. And for me as an artist, I find that art is one of these places where I can always be as free as I want. I'm only limited by my own imagination, and I'd like for my work to reward the viewer in a similar way. Meaning, if I feel a freedom in the bathroom cleaning, I'd like to clue the viewer into that experience so that cleaning no longer is this daunting or arduous task. It becomes an opportunity to paint or to think about the strokes of the toothbrush in the way that you would think about the strokes of a paintbrush.
All right.
And then one of the ways to sort of continue to involve an audience in that is by making something that an individual can hold and handle on their own. And I had started casting paintings my first semester of Hunter College and found it really rewarding to be in the ceramic studio and to be working with my body in a way that I wasn't when I was drawing or painting or writing. And the impulse, because I was thinking about painting, was to make the cast panels as big as I could, to scale up as much as the resources at Hunter College would allow me to.
Mm.
And then there was this moment after maybe a couple of friends had suggested, what about if I scaled down? Where I was thinking to myself, well, what size would the smaller canvas be? And the obvious answer was the size of a tile. So I guess in making a tile size canvas, I thought there was an obvious connection to a coaster. And then thinking about how functional art can bridge the gap between something like painting or sculpture. And so with the coaster projects, they sort of exist in three parts. I'll make my own paintings that are more constructed or sort of thinking about some of my inspirations with painting, whether it's tantric painting or abstract expressionism and color field painting. And then there's the blank coasters that I'll just give as gifts or sell. I think they're available at Special. And then finally, there's the third part, which is for individuals that have purchased a set of coasters. They have the option to, at any point, trade them in for a new set. So I think when you buy them from Special, you get a set of 3, and if you trade them in, you get 4 in return. But I ask the owners to not ever clean the coasters. There's a couple reasons for that. Functionally, they're backed with silicone, and the silicone will easily tear off if someone is cleaning them too intensely. And then the second reason is that I'd like to. It's about figuring out a way for painting to figure out how other people can make the paintings for me.
Mm. Right. Right. Yeah. And the coasters, they're like an integral part to our team, our work at the gallery, and we've never cleaned them. And I think maybe it's time for us to exchange for a new set so that our daily work can become like a painting product in itself. Um, yeah, and right, that's so interesting. And you also made a video that's called Confident Being, of that's like literally of you being naked in the bathtub, like painting, like using cleaning powder to um, work or clean a like slightly bigger panel canvas. Um, so to me that like really situates like your body in relation to the act of cleaning, and also it presents a kind of like emotional vulnerability, and and that like largely references like female conceptual artists from the 70s, in particular Mirla Latterman Euclides, whose iconic work consisted of like the Maintenance Manifesto, like scrubbing museum floors and highlighting like invisible structures of labor and value. So I wonder how you situate yourself in relation to like this, historical moment, and like how that's like influenced your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obvious nods in my work to Meryl Ottoman Euclides, Mary Kelly, Janine and Tony, these female conceptualists who also happen to be mothers, um, and I think in line with that, I don't think I could get away from this interview without saying that actually my collaborator Emily Janovic made that video, and I helped her make it for a class at Hunter College where the assignment was to make an Art 21 style video. So many of the interviews were pretty straightforward. And I had this idea that I wanted to do my interview in the bathroom. And I sort of knew the setup. And I think that's why we're really good collaborators, is that I was sort of able to create this structure. And then she did an amazing job editing the piece and sort of having creating some of that vulnerability that I don't think I would have probably allowed for in my work. And that's
Mm.
always a struggle for me. Maybe not be vulnerable, like from an early age with athletics, for instance. Athletes are trained to, be on their toes or in this 3 point stance. And I think of that as like a position of being ready, but then I wonder, ready for what? Ready for what? You're certainly not ready to receive something or to be vulnerable in that position. You're ready to be aggressive and ready to be on the attack. And there's some personal significance for what it means to be on your heels. I had both my heels have metal plates and screws in them after a bad accident in 2016. But I think even though I have that experience, I have a difficult time finding moments for vulnerability in my work. And with the paintings that I make with cleaning supplies and ceramics, it's not always really obvious what I'm trying to do with that work. And it's not particularly visually seductive. And a number of times it's been prescribed to me or suggested that I need to show people how, like, where my body is in this work or how these pieces get made. And so that was a real opportunity for me to show people how a lot of these paintings actually do get made, where it's not unlike plein air painting, except for I'm not in a landscape with a easel and oil paints. I'm in the bathroom with a toothbrush and Ajax. And luckily, Emily and I already had an intimate relationship, and she was able to convert that into, or translate that into something that resonated with our class and I think with a larger audience.
Mm. Wow, you're right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, it's something like I guess it really speaks to like the power of like collaboration and bringing out certain aspects of yourself that perhaps you wouldn't normally like um, be able to explore very freely. Um, so I wonder maybe we could move on to talking. I'm really fascinated by like your graduate thesis work, the delta, not much delta. Is that how it's titled? How it's called?
It's called
Triangle,
Not Much Change.
not much.
Delta is shorthand for the word change.
Right. There's many levels to that to unpack, it seems. Um, and like, I mean, I'm fascinated, by it not only because of the form, it's like so in that, I was supposed to be able to share images here, but I don't know. Spent all this time downloading the images, but anyways, so we'll let the viewers' imagination run. Um, so you took blankets that were handed out during Delta airline flights, and you made them into paintings that essentially like breathed in and out by like incorporating vacuums that pumped air into the soft canvases. Then like formally like this is something like really uncanny about like the way that like you made this inanimate object into like something that like breathed, and then it also like revealed forms that were behind the canvas somehow. um and I wonder, like, so there's the formal aspect to that, and then there's also the conceptual, like, very intimate storyline behind the work. So I wonder if you could talk about like how this piece, how you begun to think about this piece.
Well, I guess in the way that the cleaning supplies paintings don't necessarily always translate because they um, they're a lot about my discovery or like my own liberation and or like and I don't think that's necessarily that interesting to talk about because it's like when someone tells you you should just meditate or when someone goes on and on about the dream that they just and some people are really interested in listening to about other people's dreams. Um, and as a really like active dreamer, I'm always interested in talking about my dreams and like different moments where I feel like particularly inspired. And so a real like basic understanding of my thesis presentation was that it came to me in a dream. And it's something that I wanted that I knew immediately that I had to share and that it would be specifically for my thesis exhibition, which is pretty strange because I had the dream about a year and a half or 2 years prior to my exhibition. But in the dream, like I saw the airline blankets, I saw that they were breathing, and I knew that it was about my dad somehow. And my dad passed away when I was 5, and I wanted to somehow um, commemorate him and his death. He was also an artist, so I thought this was a timely moment to sort of do something specifically for and about him. Um, in a way that it sort of gave me an excuse out of putting any sort of pressure on myself to make work that would have been more commercially successful or I don't know. It just allowed me to be very personal with the whole process of going to graduate school and studying art and then finishing school, as opposed to thinking about forces outside of my own personal experience. Um, and I also had like my mind in other places. Like I was really involved with the student body organization at Hunter, and also how the exhibition making process would take place for our thesis. I think between those three things, I I didn't really want to think outside of myself for my thesis show.
Mm, right. Right.
And yeah,
But then there's like, um, it's interesting because like, within that like kind of very intimate and touching narrative, of your relationship with your family, there's also kind of something about the legacy of like our relationship to like, Western modernism, to masculinity, to like the author. Because you talk a little bit about um, like how how your father figure was mythologized somewhat by your mother. And so like kind of like this to me it kind of puts the personal relation to like bigger um kind of bigger forces and movements at work. So yeah.
yeah. I mean, I certainly want to point to some of those things, and there are people much smarter than me, who write about how the symbolic father would sort of shape my identity. You know, like Lacan, obviously. Uh, but uh, yeah, I guess like finding ways to be vulnerable is not super easy, and I guess that's why the writing portion of the work is really important to me. I typically present the work with some writing, and I think my current website just links right to the Hunter College CUNY thesis dissertation page, because I think it functions as a nice like entry point to that body of work. Um,
Mm,
and it's also really relative to each moment. Like you can't predict vulnerability necessarily. I think you can set the stage in different ways, but it's not till all the different parts are in motion that you actually feel that thing. And it's like a feeling that I really stay away from in a lot of ways. And I want to be able to somehow be vulnerable more often, but I don't really know how in some ways.
mm,
And work maybe even making things like somehow sometimes that like presents a way to give people access to like who you are or how you see the world, but um, sometimes like writing and performance maybe are better suited for that.
right. Right. Someone asked if we could pin a web page with these images. Am I allowed to share the your website?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
mm, oops. Is it dot something dot work or dot sorry.
My website,
Yeah.
I can type it in.
Okay, great. That's great.
It's Patrick Carlin Mohundro dot page. And then the my Vimeo page, I guess if you just Google my name, um,
Oh, you have avid audiences.
Yeah, if you Google my name in Vimeo, the videos that we're talking about will come up.
Um, you also used like kind of like edible materials like cough syrup and sugar that were casted into various forms. And um, I wonder how that comes into play with like um, uh, like the kind of the personal narrative that you've crafted. Um, like breathing, like ingesting, like uh, yeah. And I'm just curious about that.
I think some of that has to do with just personal hang-ups with traditional materials or structures and looking for any way to avoid some of that. The other thing is I'm always trying to be really true to myself and borrow from personal narratives, even if they're not the most attractive. So, you know, the cleaning supplies that I use is Ajax powder cleanser, which is something I actually use to clean my bathroom. And my mom and dad actually were both nurses, and there was this weird like relationship to using medicine to treat everything. Like if you had a headache, you immediately took an Advil or aspirin, and if you had a cough, you immediately had cough syrup. And I
Mm,
think to me they're really interesting products because they're so heavily branded, and they also don't really do the thing that they're supposed to do. Like cough syrup is not going to make you well, and when you're killing all of the bacteria in your bathroom, and maybe in the name of sort of protecting yourself from harmful molds, but it also could really be damaging you in the long term.
mm, right,
You're introducing this toxic agent into the water supply and into your the air around you.
right. The idea that products could fix everything, but then there's like this intense failure of, yeah, failures are more interesting to me than than other things, because it also speaks to like kind of a process of um, like figuring out like what these materials and how our bodies interact with these materials essentially. Um,
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's just about experimenting and seeing how one misconception can open a door for another thing. You know, like I was melting deodorant into gelatin to make a plastic, and one of the reasons I did that was because I was like looking at what was in deodorant, and I misread glycol when I was looking for products that had glycerin in them, because you could make a really simple plastic using glycerin and gelatin and water, and sort of combined these ingredients and found that the glycol in the speed stick deodorant will destabilize the plastic, and instead of having like a firm rubber type material, it turned into the material similar to like a sticky hand that you would buy in a vending machine. So I could make like these candles that were rubbery, floppy, but they would also have a property where they would stick to things. So I could install them in a gallery or space just by like throwing them at the wall, or composing different installations by just sticking plastic on the wall. And looking at the material properties of different household ingredients has been something that I'm interested in general. Like looking at how traditional painting supplies like a gesso might have calcium carbonate in it, and how that same calcium carbonate is in your almond milk, and it's also in the Ajax I use, and sort of figuring out what these like sympathetic properties are, and how they might relate. And that way, that's why um, the like rubbery cough syrup pieces that I do um, are looking at the gelatin or the glycerin that's in the cough syrup and using that as a substitute for industrial glycerin that I would otherwise have to buy to make plastic.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Are you doing any of that during like right now? Like during quarantine?
Um, Not really. I there's a space in Chinatown called Public Swim, and we're working on something, though it's not clear what. It's going to be a two-person show, um, but it's all I don't know. I don't know what the future of like the art world is, and I think making things like that, I haven't felt particularly inspired to do. Though, I've been throwing pots and teaching myself how to use a ceramics wheel. And one thing that I have found really nice, which sort of ties into how the coasters allow you guys to find art in your office place, or how cleaning paintings allow me to find this freedom or art in the bathroom. I've been, now that I'm done with school, I've been noticing that I don't have any towels, or I need different domestic products around the house. And so I've been appropriating different artists by, people that sort of occupy similar positions as me, and having them printed on things like uh, shower curtains. This is a Wade Guyton shower curtain print,
Hmm.
or the tea towel on the back is a Michael Kreber painting. So that's something that I've found more fun to do, and some of that work will be published with published by Anna Hugo and Roxanne Yeamans in a publication that they're working on called Home and Artist sometime this summer.
Hmm. Artist. That's funny. There's something like really hilarious about like using like iconic paintings to like wipe your hands with, or like, to get like mold on. Um, yeah, like kind of like that really reverses the process of, like kind of like the myths surrounding these works. Um, how are you getting them printed right now?
Just at a made to order printer. There's a couple that I'll use, whoever has the cheaper deal or whoever's format works best for the painting. It's funny to think about how like mold and smears can become, or residue can kind of become part of the painting. Um, like I feel
Mm.
like one of Wade Guyton's real strengths in his prints are, the artifacts of the printer, and it becomes really difficult to discern between what's a printing artifact that's been reproduced and what's the mold sort of growing in our shower.
Right. Mm. Um, yeah, I wonder, because speaking on the subject of painting, like all of these works that we've discussed, like they're paintings in their own ways, but they're also kind of like complicate the medium painting. They're like being pulled in the direction of like design, like installation, and like very much like process-based performance. And so like I wonder if, how, and last time we spoke a little bit about like kind of like the, of how you place kind of less significance on style, of like on maintaining like a consistent style of how you prefer to kind of like move through each moment and then like and kind of just like let things come to you regardless of like kind of the mediums that you use. And so yeah, I wonder if you like still, consider yourself like kind of first and foremost a painter, or, if it's like kind of like very much like hybrid being. Um yeah.
Yeah, I'm not interested in having a practice that like limits what I can do, mainly because I'm if art offers anything like freedom, I don't understand why I would oppose that sort of structure to myself. I mean, I think for each moment, it's important to have some sort of structure so that there can be a real focus. But as a broader way of being in the world, I'm not interested in that. And I think painting has been something a little bit murky for me always, and I've more closely or more often identified with drawing just because it's such an open-ended definition. And I think there's a real correlation between the mind and the hand when you draw, as opposed to when you're painting. I think like the brush goes through the hand and elbow and shoulder and into the heart. And I think that kind of gets to this issue of vulnerability, which I have such a problem activating in myself and in my work. And so painting and color and affect have always been quite difficult. Whereas like thinking through a problem or like overcomplicating something with logic is um is something I'm much more invested in. And drawing as a tool, as a practice in general and a background, but also as a way of looking at the world. If drawing has to do with perspective coming out of like thinking about Western or Greek perspective and how that translates to just point of view, or how our each of our perspectives or subjectivities are unique. I think that's sort of a nice correlation. But then you can apply this logic of drawing to almost anything. You draw the curtains when there's too much light. You draw blood. You a tie game ends in a draw. So in some ways, there is this like really nice balance to having a conclusion that ends drawn, but
Mm.
not painting ever. I mean, painting maybe as a performance, certainly. And I am really invested in the ways we perform ourselves at different times. And I think even as subscribing to one artist's identity over the other is just privileging one performance over the other. And because I'm more curious about how context matters or how to maximize an individual moment, I I think I spend a lot of time thinking about which performance or which version of myself am I giving for each new event or
Mm.
project.
Right. Yeah. That seems to be a much more liberated way of moving through the world. Um, um, oh, I wish I could share that performance. The part of your world performance. Like,
Yeah, so the
um,
part of your world performance is similar to this idea of thinking about a moment. At the time, I was mostly making these cleaning paintings, and that's what most of the program knew me for. But since my first semester at Hunter College, I had been working on this song that I was looking for the right moment to present to the larger student body. And so halfway through the program, there was this moment where I knew I would have an audience of the entire student body and all the faculty. And I created an installation of paintings and then also some sculptures and noise machines. So there was already like a very intense energy in the space. It was very loud, and they asked me to turn off the machine so that they could kind of talk over everything. But and so like power shifted back and forth. Like I had control over the space when everyone entered. I knew that they were entering like an uncomfortable, cacophonous setting, and then the power went into the hands of the faculty, and I had to turn off all the noise. But what the faculty didn't know, and what most of the student body didn't know, was that a number of the students were given rubber mallets, and at any given moment, they were invited to sort of casually hit a wall, and each wall had these paintings that were made out of ceramic hanging on them. And of course, when the students would hit the walls, then like paintings would occasionally fall. And so this sort of reversed the roles again, where the faculty are performing a critique, and now the power is in the students' hands to sort of interrupt if they don't like when something is said, which is not the case in this type of critique at Hunter. It's only the faculty talking, and the students just listen for the first 45 minutes. And then the student who's being critiqued is allowed to enter the conversation after 45 minutes. And when I was invited into the conversation, again, my collaborator, Emily Janovic, hit a particular wall that was loaded to have 6 paintings simultaneously fall. And she hit the wall, and then I went and hung up one of the paintings that had crashed down. And then I, as opposed to responding to the critique or asking questions about what the faculty had experienced, I launched into song. And the song was an adaptation of part of Your World from The Little Mermaid, which you can find on my Vimeo page.
Great point. Yeah, I mean, that was like, um, I mean, I felt that was very like, well, like, kind of like an impulse. It felt like impulse of the moment, like also very like well prepared, and like, and then you started, and it's like, and then you started referencing like the art world and perhaps like, your frustrations with the art world. And like, with its like, set of like rules, mythologies, and like projections. So there's like great humor in that like way of like parodying, using kind of a musical act. Um, is like, do you think about like the politics of the art world a lot, and and how does it come through in like, how you approach your practice? Yeah, like,
Yeah. I mean, how can people not pay attention to what's happening politically? It's, and if you're an artist, I think it's really important to pay particular attention to the art world as much as you can. I mean, it's really hard to make sense of, especially when you're first moving to New York, if you're a transplant or, you know, coming to your own perspective in the world. It's tremendously hard, but it is something that has come up that maybe I spend an unnecessary amount of time focusing on it. But it's it's pretty overwhelming, and I think if there's this moment where looking at the world, you can become quite critical, but then shortly after, like the criticality will turn into some sort of cynicism, and after that, maybe some sort of depression, because the cynicism like doesn't really get you anywhere. And I think maybe that's where humor does come into play, is that whether it's art or like finding funny moments in or curious moments in life, it's humor has this role of shaking you out of whatever sort of cynical perspective that you might have.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Um, yeah. And especially as it relates to how you like start to carve out a space, you know, within this already existing structure. Um, yeah, I remember like first moving to New York and then like I don't know, getting into a place where, you know, like I don't know, like I remember going around to openings and then like um having people tell me that like I should do things a certain way, you know, like, you know, this is yeah, like this is the way to succeed. But I think yeah, like and at a certain point you do like come to a dead end with, you know, like kind of not uh yeah, like, you know, how to basically, you know, how to navigate, you know, how you exist within the structure. And I think you have a very interesting way of like kind of this like anti-professionalist way of like kind of existing within the structure. Like for example, like not having a website or, you know, like kind of like really focusing on the moment. Um uh, and like creating kind of structures within structures. Um like for example pad, I think it's your other project pad gallery is kind of an interesting example. Yeah, so yeah, I think it would be cool like if you could talk a little bit about, you know, that um and how that project of like curation and like community making exists in relation to your artistic um practice.
Yeah, so Pad is a really important project for me. It's the only online presence it has is the Instagram at pad underscore gallery. And it is a gallery under the auspices of a street sale or vice versa. I haven't quite figured that out. But basically, I just stage groups like 2 to 5 person exhibitions on a shipping blanket, most often on the corner of Spring and Wooster. They're 1 day exhibitions, so the, if you miss it that Saturday, then the only way to see it is on our Instagram. Uh, Maybe going back to this fear when you first came to New York, I think that's something that everyone really feels. The art world can feel like really pretentious or opaque or inaccessible. And then at some moment you realize everyone is going through this thing together and that these people are all like really interesting and could potentially be really good friends. I think this is particularly the case for people who have moved from outside, but maybe it's everyone who's in the art world. Like I think we're a really lucky demographic that can readily share ideas and feelings sort of at the drop of a pin. We're taught to give our elevator pitch and then our 100 word artist statement and our 200 word artist statement and then our 500 word essay, like within succession. And in some ways, it can feel very networky or opportunistic, but there's there's so many amazing artists in the city. It also is like a great petri dish for just sharing feelings and ideas. And so Pad comes out of maybe looking at that and exposing how, hey, we're all just having fun anyways, and if there wasn't this pressure to pay exorbitant rents, then we could maybe be making more or like with less inhibition. Um, so Pad basically got started because I had tried to do street sales of my own and failed really miserably, trying to sell like illustrations or jars of rice. And then while I was at Hunter, I still had all this rice, but wasn't sure if I would ever try to sell it again. And then another friend in the program, Arcady Ryabin, he he was making these really great laser etched pieces of bread. And if you've ever laser etched bread, you'll notice that it turns into toast. And we talked about doing maybe like a food exhibition or trying to sell food together in Soho. But by the time we got around to it, Arcady had moved on from the project and wanted to sell his thesis show. So rather than try to sell my work with this work that was t-shirts, which I just didn't think made sense, I was like, well, I have this friend that's making these mashup New York Yankees, New York Mets baseball caps. Your t-shirts are mashup t-shirts. He was mashing up the Nirvana smiley face with the I Love New York logo. I was like, let's do an I Love New York show. And that was the beginning of Pad. But I think Pad sort of can exist because of, a whole list of people doing alternative spaces like Rachel Vera Steinberg, who runs Custom Program, Catbox Contemporary, um, and then, of course, there's like obvious nods to David Hammond and Meryl Otterman Euclides again. And Special Special. I mean, it's anyone sort of thinking out of the traditional white cube model. And what I really like about Special Special is how they're trying to figure out how to democratize artwork, how to make artwork or help artists produce pieces that are at a price point that more people can afford, whether that's coming up with limited editions with artists or, selling smaller ceramics. I think Pad is very much in line with that ethos. One of the things I do is I ask artists to try to price their work under $75. And so we get $1 pieces, we get $50 pieces, and then occasionally we sort of get slightly outside of those margins. But I think what that does is it allows us to have a way to access the diverse audience that we have selling artwork in Soho. We probably get more foot traffic than any other gallery in the city.
Right.
And it's really, it's tourists, it's fashionistas, it's people like locals with squatters' rights or who have like made their fortune in New York. And so, all these different people are interested in art and our work sort of stands out. And so a tourist can go home with like a set of porcelain. Whether it's a t-shirt or Jesus Benavente made these great fleece blankets that had instructions on how to resist ice if they came into your apartment.
Mm.
And I find it like a nice way to both be like of the moment, political, in the streets with a lot of different people. It's a great moment also to just like scream "fuck Trump" whenever there's a tourist group coming by, learning about the history, like the seedy history of Soho. It's a way to remind them that Soho is or was a historically arts-centered neighborhood.
Right. Right. Hmm. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's really a way of like engaging with like the environment and like history of a place. Um, yeah. I mean, and like I find it also really interesting, like, because last time you talked a little bit about this like how this project kind of allows for like the kind of a almost like an erasure of self, because like you're there, you're present, kind of like as kind of like a vendor, but then like you are peddling like other people's work, and like passersby, like they don't know that. So like I'm sure that makes for like a very, I don't know, like fascinating hybrid of experience. Um, just doing that. Um, do you think there will be a next time? Like
Yeah,
when?
I hope so. I mean, we'll be the first people, the first gallery back open if there is a next time. I mean, it's really hard to say what the future is. There's so many unknowns. Um, we had the season programmed. We had like 40 plus artists signed up to do shows this summer. We'll see.
Yeah, but we'll see. See what happens.
One of the nice things that it is there is no overhead, so it's very plausible that we could get right back to it in gloves and masks. But it's you know because it's such a huge risk for the artists, I would want to make sure that there's an audience for the artists. And so if there isn't the same sort of audience in the city anyways, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to do. But if there was an audience, if people were traveling again, or if people are going back to work, I think some of these projects that are easily accessible to the public can just bring some joy in every day. Like I think of this meme that like went viral maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago of this, I think an old lady in the Midwest or something who put a sign outside of her house saying, to invent a new walk or to walk in an interesting way while they pass her house because they're being recorded. And people saw the sign and people responded to it in a really positive way. And it's this great way to have people just pay attention to something other than the monotony of their lives or the whatever stressful moment that they have going on, or like quarantine, and to be
Mm.
playful again. And in the same way as like you know galleries that can have a public facing window or art that can exist in public still stands to bring a tremendous sense of joy to the rest of the population.
Mm. Right. Like you wouldn't consider like doing this as like kind of a more, now that like there's so much like virtual content going on, like you wouldn't be interested in like turning this into a TVB like type like commercial, where you're like vending the product, like in a controlled environment. But maybe I suppose that like kind of takes away from like the randomness of like physical physical encounters.
Yeah, the IRL, like Pat is about being in the streets. I mean, like I said, like David Hammond's, Meryl Ottoman Euclid's, like they were about like those projects had to do with like touching hands or like being on the ground. It's weird because in some ways Pad has the most potential to get right back to it in some ways, but on the other hand, it's one of the most unsanitary projects. We're sitting in these disgusting streets in Soho all day long, most often under like 90-degree sun, and it's not like the most pleasant of experiences, but and it's certainly not.
How did that happen?
I think they have a 1 hour limit on the talk.
And we're back. And we're live.
Thanks for joining us again from the bathtub. I've been making these soaps. I don't do much to them, but if you just leave soap in your bathroom for long enough, it gets hydrated and dehydrated enough where it starts to break apart and look like coral or toenail fungus, depending on what you're more familiar with. I'm the latter.
Oh, wait. So it's just soap?
This is just soap. This is just soap that I've left in the shower.
Interesting. It looks like one of those like insides of, you know how like I don't know what kinds of plants are like dried out and you use it to like wash dishes with
Like a
any
sponge.
a sponge. Yeah, a sponge. A soap
Yeah.
sponge.
Coral, sponge, all of that.
Um, so right off you were cut off in saying like kind of like seediness and like, you
Oh
know,
yeah,
sad.
Pat is disgusting. I mean, there have been mornings where like there's dog shit on the ground and like I'm trying to wash it up with just like a bottle of water and then we put the blanket down on top of the wet dog shit and we put all the artwork up and then I pack up that blanket after it's sat in the sun for 12 hours and just goes back into my studio and then the next time we unwrap it, we don't know which way is the clean side. It's so in this COVID moment, I mean, maybe it'll be better because we'll have gloves and masks, but I think the big thing for me is, figuring out what the real time engagement could be. Because if there's not real time engagement, it sort of defeats some of the purpose. Because I think like in this way of giving back to artists who are willing to participate, they get all of the money I make in the day. I try to do all the work, and my other selling point is you kind of get to see how people respond to your work in real time. Outside of the confines of an art opening where everyone's sort of there to celebrate you, nobody knows if this is even your work or not, or who the work belongs to. And so this is a way to sort of sit to the side and appreciate how people might respond to something that you've made.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be interesting to see how, I mean, after all this, like kind of like our, you know, like what would happen to like physical intimacy, touch, exchange, you know, especially in the public realm. Like that, I like just would not know what to expect with that, you know, and that might be an interesting ground for experimentation.
Yeah, I think about how people are willing to be vulnerable to those sorts of experiences, and I think I don't think anyone's going to really want to have conceptual COVID art anytime soon. I think it's too, you know, it's too soon or something. There was a maybe like 10 years ago at Hunter College. So this was like after the AIDS epidemic, but it was still pretty fresh in a lot of people's minds. There was a an artist and student who sort of had like a mysterious like social life. There were rumors that he was a sex worker and all these things, and or that he was living in the studio. And during one of his critiques, he like drew blood from both of his arms and then aerated the his blood. And there was a number of faculty who had lost friends during the AIDS epidemic, and they just expelled him from the program. They're like, this doesn't have a place even in this very experimental art program. And so I sort of think about how sometimes like the cleverness that's occasionally associated with conceptual art just it's not like a particular time to play with people's like emotions and safety in that way. Like I think when it comes to art and vulnerability, there should be some sort of threshold that people can pass in and out of. And I think with COVID, because it's so hard, like the new data comes out all the time. It's really hard to make sense of it, and so people are just in this perpetual state of fear.
Right, right. I mean, especially in that moment, you don't want to take advantage of, you know, certain like shock value or anything like that. I think I don't know. We just need time to process because I don't know what's going on. Um, yeah.
Yeah, like when it comes to just dealing with like friendships and relationships and stuff, I think of like this idea of a small win. like you need a couple of small wins where they're just like really casual conversations with friends that you've had falling outs with, or family members that you're not interested in talking to. I think like creating situations where you can like slowly ease yourself back into some sort of context where you're willing to be vulnerable. It takes like the small things, and so just and I think in some ways like instances like this, like what Special is doing in terms of continuing to promote their show. There are these small wins for normalcy, or maybe not even normalcy, maybe the future, and getting people in the state where they can start to imagine what a new future for artwork might be.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Baby steps. Um, yeah. I mean, we're also, in the process of figuring that out. It's like not an easy thing to do. But also wanting to provide something for like our community, and kind of, yeah, and be a source of inspiration. I don't know, like however small. Um, I think we've gone over time, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk
Banyi,
about
thank you
you.
so much for taking time to do this and reading all of my terrible writing
Oh,
and making your way through the no website zone.
no, my pleasure. Pleasure. I like actually haven't read a lot, so this was like a very fresh dive, back into like the theoretical and the personal. So I don't know, I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.